Hunting is an avid hobby of mine and runs in the family. My favorite animals to catch are deer and boars, as they are quite a challenge to catch, and I love challenges. As well as general hunting, camping in the woods is therapeutic for me, as you're in nature's natural habitat, which can be greatly enjoyed when you're by yourself. Accompanying this are the type of people you meet while hiking. I've met people who shared food and campfire with me, and some even hiked with me in the gorgeous wilderness we call the woods. But most of the time, it's your animal friends who accompany you while walking and camping. I wish the story was about the above, but things took a plummet for the worse, and this is my story. I recently completed an assignment, which I would describe as long-winded and quite boring, even though it's my favorite topic, human biology. Due to this, I decided to take a 5-day hike across a vast stretch of woods, brilliant for hunting apparently. As a hunting enthusiast, I decided to hunt for some deer, and possibly some boar, if I came across any. So I prepped up my water filter, packed up my tranquilizer and hunting equipment, as well as my pop-up tent and some snacks high in energy. I took a 3.5 drive to my destination. I was stoked and excited, as I could unwind around nature and overall enjoy the atmosphere that the woods provided. After what seemed like days behind the wheel, I arrived at what looked like an abandoned parking lot at 3 p.m. as all the bays were empty. The ranger's office looked like it hadn't been occupied for years. I parked and began my hike. The place gave me a very uneasy vibe, as the woods beyond the ranger's office were sinister in a way. I can't really describe what gave me this uneasiness, but I honestly chalked it up to the place looking abandoned and creepy. Either way, I headed out onto the path and began scouting the area for animals. I gotta be honest, this set of woods was exquisite. The sun was shining through the trees and the animals were up and active. I came across a few deers, but no boars unfortunately. Fast forward to 8:30 p.m. It was uneventful to be honest, and it was getting pretty dark and gloomy now, as it's mid-November. Now, I need to add that I'm quite a paranoid guy, as my house was burglarized at the age of 15. All was okay in the end, but the paranoia of something or someone lurking in the shadows stays with me in the back of my mind when I'm out alone at night. Anyway, excuse the babbling. I then whipped up a fire, cooked up some marshmallows, and warmed up some beans. I ate away, minding my own business. After this, I decided to go for a late night hunt, as I did a 2-week course on how to hunt prey in the woods when it's dark, and I think it really paid off. 15 minutes later, I put the fire out as I was prepared to go on a late night hunt. But then, my blood ran cold as ice, and my hands started to shake when I saw a silhouette of a man about 100 meters away from me. It was unexpected, so it initially freaked me the fuck out. As well as this, I noticed a small pocket knife in their hand, and it looked like they were crouching and stalking something. I believed it was a man about 6 feet tall, and his back was facing me, so I believed he didn't notice I was there, which was a godsend. However, it could just be another hunter like myself. After shitting bricks while watching this man for 5 minutes, he disappeared into the inky sky, and I got over it pretty quickly as I thought it was a fellow hunter like myself. I honestly wish that was the case. Fast forward an hour, and it's around 9:45, and I'm feeling confident enough to go back into the black wilderness and catch a deer or two, or maybe even a boar. I pinpoint where my tent is with a map, and I went on my way with my hunting equipment. 10 minutes later, I'm practically in no man's land, as everywhere around me was pitch black. I was stalking a deer, which hadn't noticed me, and was about 50 meters in front of me. I grabbed my tranquilizer and placed the deer in my sights. That's when I heard twigs snap. My eyes darted, my legs went into jelly mode, and I jerked my neck to the source of the noise. What the fuck? A fucking silhouette appeared out of the trees to the left of me, about 50 yards away, and just watched me. Not the deer, but me. The deer was long gone by now, so it was just me and an unwanted guest. His eyes concluded to me that he was the same guy as before, roughly 6 feet, 200 pounds. He stared at me, and I stared back, my body still as a stone. But then my sudden outburst of adrenaline was making me shake. I couldn't see his face as it was too dark. Fuck. Was he the late night human butcherer? Am I not gonna see daylight again? I just about choked out. Who's there? I tried to say in the calmest voice I could, but the fear was evident when I asked the question. The man raised his hand with a pocket knife and pointed his index finger towards me. That was it. I fucking bolted it north, while mildly tripping over and hitting my head on tree branches. Twigs snapped rapidly behind me as the son of a bitch was chasing me. I looked back and saw his vacant right hand brushing the tree branches to the side of him, his knife gripped tightly in his left hand. I then realized that during it all, I had dropped my tranquilizer. Fuck that shit, I can buy a new one. I know, I should have shot the guy, but it's amazing what one can forget when in a horrific situation, even if it's a gun. I wasn't going back for it. A ton of thoughts were going through my mind while I was fleeing. Why me? What does he want? Money? Food? What could it fucking be? That's when I honestly thought I was gonna piss myself, as then he said one rapid tone, "Isn't this fun?" He then had the goddamn audacity to start laughing in a patronizing way, and I couldn't take it anymore. I sped up, and I'll tell you now, it's amazing what the human body can do when adrenaline and natural instincts take over. I never ran so fast in my life. I made a hard right, dove into some bushes nearby quietly, and eventually lost the guy. I heard footsteps going the opposite way, and it turns out that I went in a huge circle as I could see my tent only 50 meters away now. I was fucking shaking, and tears started to form, but I had to stay strong. I just had to. What would my father do in this situation? I turned my ears into the inky darkness and heard nothing, saw nothing. I was not going to turn my phone light on, as I'd be an open target. I checked my watch and it was now 10:30. I was in my tent for 10 minutes. I sat there listening to every small noise I could hear in the woods. Snap. I held my gasp as I heard a twig snap behind my tent. And then a low sinister voice. "You think you can run? I win." With that, my tent was being sliced open and the fucker's head popped in. He was fucking licking his lips and his eyes were locked with my eyes. "You lose," he screams as he pulls the knife out. Fighting, not my strong point, but the gym made me a pretty strong guy. So he tried to stab me and I grabbed both of his arms and fended him off from plunging his blade into my torso. I tried to disarm him and he laughed during the whole process. I thought he was trying to intimidate me. However, I was ready to kill. Not a deer, not a boar, but a human. I restrained his left wrist, but the knife was inches away from going into my foot. As I stepped onto his right hand, I pulled back on his left wrist. Then, snap. His wrist was snapped. He let out a blood-curdling scream. I had the upper hand on this fucker and took advantage of this. I got the knife from his shattered hand and gave him a taste of his own medicine. I sunk the knife into his right hand and he screamed. I laid a few punches and I think I popped his nose, but I have no regrets. I grabbed my arm in pain as he made me bend in an awkward position when he was on top of me when he first ripped into the tent. But honestly, I couldn't care less about my injuries. He tried to kick me, but I punched him in the face until he was unconscious. I checked my phone and I had no phone service. Fuck, I panted. I picked up this fucker into a fireman's lift, and I remembered on my way there was a ranger's office that was exactly west of my tent. After an hour struggling with a killer on my shoulders out cold, I found the ranger station, and to my surprise, a young man around 20 was there. I collapsed to my knees as I explained the situation, and it turns out this guy slashed my left bicep, but the adrenaline numbed out the pain. So when it finally wore off, I was in pain and noticed the laceration. The ranger called for backup and they eventually arrived. I don't know how long it took. Screw my belongings, I wasn't going back out there to retrieve them. The ranger offered to drive me to the nearest hospital in my car. The Night Stalker was taken away, but was semi-conscious. The next day, I was woke up in the hospital to an officer. What he said next is burned into my memory and will never be erased. When I first saw the killer, his back was towards me. The knife was in his left hand and he was crouching as I mentioned earlier. It turns out that he was stalking another hiker who was brutally murdered and mutilated at the scene. They found chloroform at the scene, hence why I never heard any screams or cries for help. I vowed from there on never to go hunting by myself again. The next time I went hunting was years after this incident, with 4 of my mates. Although the woods have a beautiful atmosphere and vibe, never judge a book by its cover, as tables can be turned within a blink of an eye. For all of you that go camping and hiking, stay safe, and remember, don't think that these things can't happen to you. This is my first post. I am 28 years old, but when I was 5 years old, my mom and I lived in this duplex that was off the main road, kind of in a wooded area. We lived on one side, and on the other was a woman and her son. He was studying to be a teacher. My mother had me young, so she was about 25, and this guy was in his early 20s. He would often come by to talk to my mom. My mother said that he would ask a lot of questions about me, and asked my mother if it was alright to take me for walks in the woods. My mother always declined. She worked in the operating room at the local hospital and was on call a lot, so most weekends I stayed at my grandma's house. One night while I was at my grandma's house, my mom was home alone, sleeping. She woke up in the middle of the night and said that she doesn't remember if she heard something or felt something in the room, but she woke up. She could see feet wearing socks sticking out from the end of her bed. She grabs the bedside lamp and was about to hit the intruder when the neighbor yelled her name and said his name. He couldn't explain why he was naked and only wearing socks and begged my mother not to tell his mom. My mother, of course, called the cops. She ended up going to court and making a victim impact statement against this guy because she was terrified that he would become a teacher and be around children. She says she's pretty sure that he was there for me that night, and I'm so happy I wasn't there. We ended up moving immediately because she couldn't stay another night in the house. So, neighbor who broke into our house wearing only socks, let's not meet, and let's also pray that you're nowhere near young children. I remember when I was around the age of 4. My family and I lived in a small apartment on the 4th floor, which was pretty high. The apartment was full of stupid people, like drug addicts and low-life criminals. There were really no kids in the unit, so I mainly spent my time playing with toys. One night, after my mom turned off the lights for bedtime and the whole family went to sleep, I woke up in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. I was pretty thirsty, so I go to grab a cup of water from the kitchen. But as I'm pulling off my blanket, I heard noises. Noises coming from the other side of the house. Being a stupid toddler, I didn't think anything of it, so I got up and I walked out of my room. The moon was lighting up the room through the opening of the sliding glass door to the balcony. But then I come to a terrifying realization that the sliding glass door was supposed to be closed. I knew this because I was the one who closed it before bed. But at that moment I heard the noises again, and they were coming from the kitchen. I put 2 and 2 together and realized someone was in my home. I tried tiptoeing to my parents' room, but I looked behind me and what I saw scared me. It was a man in a costume. He looked at me and then ran and grabbed me. He was pulling my hair and putting his hands in my mouth. But I broke out of his grip and ran to my mother's room. I was too scared to say anything. The next morning I told my mother everything, but she just told me it was a wild nightmare. I tried to tell my dad, but he said the same thing. Only I know what happened, and no one believes me. I will never forget that sack he wore over his head, and the thing that still bothers me is how he managed to get on the 4th floor. The doors were locked, and so were the windows. So did he climb up the entire building? And if he did, why me? Being a dancer, I sometimes resell some of my leotards online, mostly on eBay, small ads, because it's easy and fast. I had ordered a leotard online from another country, which, unfortunately, was too small for me. As shipping costs were too high to send it back, I decided just to sell it on eBay. It was completely new and never worn. It also had its tag still on it. So one night, around 1 a.m., I received an anonymous call. I wasn't fast enough to answer. I didn't think much of it and went back to sleep. The next morning, someone called anonymously again. This time I answered and there was heavy breathing. I asked, "Who is this?" But the person on the phone just kept breathing. I hung up. It was evening the same day and I got another call. I answered the phone, this time to a guy who sounded surprisingly young. He said that he saw my ad on eBay and he was interested in buying the leotard, but he had one question. "Sure," I said, and he asked me if it was possible for me to wear the leotard for a couple days, don't wash it afterwards, and send it to him. At first I was a bit confused, but then decided that it wasn't a big deal. I'm a tolerant person, and I think it's okay to have fetishes. He also offered me 3 times the price I paid for the leotard. Me being a poor 25-year-old student, I was excited, and I agreed. I already thought that it might be better to make him pay via PayPal and not write my address on the package. Still thinking about how I will manage this, he asked me another question. "Would it be possible if you masturbate while wearing the leotards too?" I was hesitant. I'm still thinking about how I don't want to judge people based on their weird sexual preferences, but at the same time, I thought it might be a little too much to ask for. I told him I wanted to think about it, and he offered to call again later. So later, which was only 10 minutes, he called again, heavy breathing, and supposedly jerking off while talking to me, asking me if I had came to a conclusion yet. Then he asked me if we could meet for sex too. I was now creeped out, as this had crossed the line for me. I said I wasn't interested in having sex with him, and I didn't want to sell my leotard to him either. He then mumbled something obscene and hung up on me. At this point, I might need to add that my eBay shows my real full name and a vague location based on the postal code. I only realize now how naive this is, but until this event, I never thought about how it might be a bit unsafe. I was a bit creeped out as this guy knew my real name and sort of where I lived. But then I thought, due to the fact that I have a very common name in a city where there's 100+ girls my age with that name, I might just stop being paranoid. He was just looking online to buy clothes from some girl who worn them. Yeah, I was wrong. The next days, I received at least 5 anonymous calls a day. I never answered, but I knew who the anonymous caller was. The calls continued and continued, and roughly after 10 days, I decided to answer the phone and tell him to fuck off. There was heavy breathing again, and he asked me several disgusting things, at some point screaming, "Answer me, bitch!" I was totally creeped out and hung up on him. He called again. For a minute, I tried to resist the urge to answer, but after the shock I had gotten, I was very angry and wanted to scream back at him. I picked up the phone. He started saying that if I didn't play along and talk with him, he was going to come visit me and force me. I said I don't believe him. He laughed, very creepy, and said that he knew where I lived. I had a strange feeling, but wasn't sure to believe him or not. I told him that he was a sick man and that he didn't know shit, and if he calls me again, I'm calling the police. Then I hung up on him. I told my boyfriend this conversation. He knew the whole story, and I said that I was a bit scared that he might actually found out where I lived. We both agreed on being a bit alert for the next time, and I tried to forget about this whole thing. 2 days later, my boyfriend was going on a walk with our cat. Yeah, we leash trained him, and he actually loves it. We live in a big city complex, so that's the only way he can go outside. Anyways, my boyfriend noticed something odd. A guy with a foreign license plate parked on the other side of the street where our apartment was, and he was strolling along the houses, checking all the door plates. He then arrived to our house. My boyfriend could see him writing something down when he checked our door plate. The man then realized that my boyfriend was watching him, rushed back into his car and drove off. We later checked the city of the license plate, and it turned out to be a city is from 450 kilometers away, a 4 to 5 hour drive. At this point, I was really scared. Was this him? Had he actually done research and checked out all the options where I could live and who I might be? I went to the police the other day. They told me that it wasn't possible pressing charges because he wasn't actually doing anything, and that he needed to be calling me for 6 months minimum till it would be an actual crime to pursue. The calls continued. I never answered. I couldn't block the number because it always said anonymous. Then, yesterday, I called the phone provider and somehow managed to block everyone who calls me anonymously. I really hope he'll just let this go when he realizes that he needs to put a lot of effort into this, and I really hope this guy checking houses wasn't him, looking for me. This encounter happened to a friend and a coworker of mine about 15 years ago in the suburb of Los Angeles, California. My friend, I'll call her Jody, lived with her parents and her older brother in a house in a pretty nice neighborhood, and they didn't really have to worry about crime and break-ins. One night though, around 2 a.m., Jody was woken up by a loud knocking at her front door. She jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway where her parents and brother are coming out of their own rooms. The knocking, now pounding, continued. "Stay here," said her father, and he made his way towards the door. All of a sudden, they hear a muffled male voice shouting, "Help me! Help me!" Jody and her mom grab each other in fear, and her dad looked out the peephole. "There's nobody there," he said. He looked out the front window, where you could see part of the front door and the porch. He still didn't see anyone. He walked back towards his family when the loud knocking began again, and this time more frantically. Again, a voice shouted, "Help me!" Jody's dad went to the phone and called 911, and while talking to the operator, her brother had walked to the front of the house. The pounding was still going on, getting faster and faster until it was constant banging. "Help me! Help me! Oh God, help me!" Jody, in tears of fright by now, looked over to her brother, who was standing in the family room, which was located to the left of the front door. His face was white, and he made an arm gesture for them to join him. Jody, her mom, and dad, who was on the phone with the police by now, hurried into the family room, where they immediately realized why her brother's face had gone pale. The pounding and shouting was coming from underneath the family room floor. The police arrived 20 minutes later, and it turned out that some guy in his 20s had gotten all out of his mind that night on crack and somehow made it into the opening of the crawl space under their house, located under the family room window. They never found out exactly what his intentions was, but I assumed that he was just trying to find his way into the house to rob it, but then got disoriented because he was so high and freaked out, hence the pounding and shouting. This story gave me the goosebumps the first time she told me, and I thought of it again when I discovered this forum. Two years ago, I was home alone around dusk. I was starting to get supper ready for my husband and my kid, who weren't home yet. It was late May, so it was beginning to be warmer in the evenings, so I had my back patio door open, which opened into our backyard, and I had the barbecue going with some chicken on it. I was inside making salad, some potato salad, and corn on the cob, when I heard a knock on my front door. I knew it wasn't my husband because he had just left 20 minutes before to drop off one of my kids at his friend's house to hang out for a bit. When I reached the door, I looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her late 20s, early 30s standing there. Now, I don't normally open the door for anyone I don't know, especially at night, but we live in a private gated community, so I wasn't too alarmed. This woman was about 5'5", with shoulder-length dark blonde hair, hazel eyes, and a very pregnant belly. She began to tell me that her phone was dead and she was having car trouble, and was new to the area trying to find her sister's house. She asked me if there was a man in the house to come outside and look at her car. I told her no, my husband wasn't home, and she should go to my neighbor's house next door for help. She kept on insisting that I must have a man home, and she didn't want to go to another house because she saw me through the front window and felt safe with me. She kept looking over my shoulder to my living room, as my downstairs was an open concept and you could see from the front door to the back patio. I knew something wasn't right. She was very persistent with me, asking my husband to come outside and help her. I told her I could call her sister for her, since her phone was dead, and she told me that she didn't know her number. I said, "You don't know your own sister's number?" This set off a few red flags for me because Who doesn't know their sister's phone number? At this point, I was afraid that she was waiting for someone to go up through my back open patio door, so I told her I'd call my husband. I called my husband and in a quiet whisper explained to him what was happening. He said he wouldn't be home for at least another hour. I hung up and told this woman this. She then asked me if I had kids and if they were home. I said yes I do and no they aren't and I can't help you, and shut the door. I ran to the back door and slammed it shut and locked it. I could still see her car in the front of my house on the street, but ignored it and went back to making supper. I had just settled into my meal and no one from my family was home yet when I thought I heard kids yelling outside. I ignored it again and went back to Wheel of Fortune and my food. I was still a little rattled about what happened, but didn't think much more of it since I had everything locked. 30 seconds later, I hear someone screaming my name. Melanie! Melanie! Call the police! Call the police! Then I saw people on my lawn and heard my husband screaming for help. I ran to the front door and swung it open. There were 2 masked men with crowbars and baseball bats, and they were literally beating my husband to death. There's pepper spray in the air so thick, my eyes were burning, and I could taste it in my mouth. I started screaming and ran between the men, grabbed my husband and physically dragged him into the house as a man crossed the lawn to the waiting car where the pregnant woman was driving. I called 911 and told them someone tried to kill my husband. I watched as they sped off and out of sight. My husband was covered in blood from head to toe. His eye was completely swollen shut. His leg was cut open from the crowbar attack. His head was covered in blood and had deep cuts and lacerations covering his head and body. I was on the phone with 911 screaming and trying to catch my breath from the pepper spray in my mouth, and washed out my eyes while trying to help my husband. The police took 10 minutes to show up, and by then the attackers were long gone. I am thankful that my children didn't come home at the time my husband did. We never found out who did this or why. My husband owns a private ATM business and we think it has something to do with that, but they didn't steal anything. It was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I'll never forget the woman's face, and I always feel guilty for calling my husband because he came right home after the call, even though he said he wasn't going to, just to check to see if everything was okay. First time poster. This happened in the fall of 2014. I was 20 and recently widowed thanks to cancer. I was living with my parents again and looking to get back out on my own. I had found roommates in the past from Craigslist and it wasn't a problem for me. I never met any weirdos or anything. This time was a bit different. I met a guy, we'll call him Andrew. We texted for a few days and he seemed normal. We exchanged pics, just for peace of mind. We decided to meet up and he told me he didn't have a car. Red flag. How are you gonna move out without a car? We didn't live in a city with a very good bus line, so it just seemed off to me. So, stupid me decides to pick him up later that day. He lives in the next town over, and we were just going to McDonald's to get to know each other. At 8 p.m. I start making my way to his house, which I came to find out is a trailer park. I finally found the right one, and he comes and gets in my car. Just looks like a normal 18-year-old kid, except he looked younger, in my opinion. Maybe 15 to 17-ish. He was Hispanic and not bad looking. He did seem fidgety though. We get to McDonald's and I'm like, so should we go in? To which he replies, let's just sit in the parking lot. I found this odd, but whatever. We sit and chat and kind of get to know each other. I found out that he works in the next town over. Keep in mind, this is now 2 towns away from where I wanted to move, and he has no car. He says it won't be a problem. He starts looking around, super nervous. He asks about my dating life, and this is where things got a little odd. I tell him about my husband, and he asks if I would consider dating him so we could get a 1-bedroom. He keeps talking about how I can cook and clean for him and be his girl. At this point, alarm bells are ringing, but I keep my cool and laugh along saying, hey, you never know what could happen. I tell him I need to go home because it's getting late. I take him back home and we part ways without incident. He texts me the next day, but I never replied. So that's my sort of creepy Craigslist story. I probably won't use it to find roommates anymore. This is a very true story. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and in my hometown there's a lot of houses from the 1800s, but mainly they are new houses. I just happened to get a babysitting gig with another girl because their kids were very hard to take care of. Now, I wasn't very familiar with babysitting, seeing that I've only taken care of my cousins from time to time. Anyways, I went to the house after picking up the girl who was helping me with the kids. Let's just say this house looked like a murder house from the 1800s, but I shook off the feeling and went in to meet the parents. Also, the girl and I were working from 4 to 11 p.m. and Halloween was next week, so this makes it even more crazy. The kids and I got along great. I kept their names straight, unlike the other girl. She did nothing but play on her phone. She didn't help with the kids. Things were fine until about 9:30 p.m. I put down one of the kids and the girl put down the other one. We had one kid left, and he was old enough to get into his bed on his own. Once all of them were in bed, some shit happened, and we still can't explain how these things happened. The first thing that happened was on the intercom that was in the parents' office and basement. Static and moans came out from it, and in the basement we heard footsteps running up and down and moving of plastic bags. I heard a grown man's laugh where the kids were and bolted the stairs as fast as I could as my motherly instinct to protect them. When I got up there, they were fine, and they had a guard dog to protect them, but you never know what could happen. Things just got weirder. Those things kept happening, and the girl I was with hid in the bathroom and was no help. So I grabbed the other dog, since I wasn't downstairs a lot due to my runs to make sure the kids were okay. Big mistake, that dog was evil. It bit me and the girl. The kids as well, which is why she was left outside in the first place. But I had to do something to protect this girl, even if I disliked her. I still didn't want her to die. The parents came home at 11, and we told them everything. And well, the dad went into the basement and saw the intercom was turned on, and the girl's food bag, which I saw her throw away, was down there, which was freaking creepy as hell. I wasn't too scared because somehow I've always been kind of fearless, but I'm still trying to figure out how those things happened. I'm looking in to see if there was someone murdered in that house. We have a lot of haunted places where I live, and I decided to post my story of paranormal activities, which I don't believe, but it was just too weird to be a human. Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Welcome to my Christmas mega collab. Joining me today are tons of channels. A majority of them are rather small, so make sure you sub to as many as possible. Timestamps will be in the description and in the pinned comment, so feel free to skip through and find the voices that you like the most. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Also, have a Merry Christmas, or whatever you celebrate. At the time of the story, I was 20 years old. I am now 27, and I should also mention that I'm a female. I was working part-time in the cosmetic department at a drugstore, working mostly evenings, being a student and all. I was never overly afraid of being there at night. It wasn't a bad neighborhood at all, middle upper class, and there was always at least 4 people working in the store at a time. However, regardless of the neighborhood we were in, idiots would be idiots, and the theft rate in our store was at an all-time high, and it usually targeted in the evenings. This company was a fantastic company to work for, and they generally cared about our safety and of course the products that would go missing, so they hired a security company to help cover the store in the evenings, mostly in the cosmetic department. I should also mention that although there were other employees in the store, the cosmetic department was pretty secluded, and there was only ever one employee, usually a female, scheduled in the department at a time. Because of this, the company of security guards was definitely welcome to help pass the time on a long, quiet night. I worked 4 evenings a week, and another girl covered the other evenings, and it was usually the same schedule each week. There were a few different guards that would come to our stores, but on most occasions it was just one male. I'd guess around 25 years old, not unattractive and very friendly. Let's call him Mike. Mike would come in his uniform and post up at our counter and basically scare away any potential thieves by just doing that. Quite often we would chit-chat and pass the time having idle conversations. I'm very talkative, pretty much an open book and sometimes too forthcoming with personal information. I began noticing that on my shifts, it was only ever Mike on duty, and asked him about it, to which he replied, "Yeah, you're stuck with me now. Everyone else has other postings." That was entirely possible, and I didn't think much of it. That is, until I went into the store one of the nights I was off to pick up something, and saw that there was a different guard there with the other employee. We'll call her Sarah. I said hello to Sarah and the other guard, and I said, "Oh, it must be Mike's night off," to which the other guard replied, "Mike only works Sunday through Wednesday." Well, that caused a little lump in my throat. That was my exact schedule. Has to be a coincidence, right? 20-year-old naive me thought so. On with my life I went, not worried about a thing. The things that followed were a series of minor creepy encounters with Mike. Running into him at the movie theater in my town, when I know from previous conversations he lived in the town 20 minutes away, which had its own theater with the same showings. Having him show up at work on a day I took an extra shift, in uniform, claiming he was on his lunch break, and now he gets prescriptions at the store instead of the one near his house due to better service. I asked the pharmacy tech if he had prescriptions filed, and she said no. The next thing still gives me the chills, and is when I started being not so friendly to this guy. I also want to make it clear that on many occasions while having conversations with Mike, I mentioned my awesome boyfriend, and there's no way he could have thought I was available or interested in him. After a vacation that Mike took with some friends, he was back to work in the same shifts as me at the drugstore, and I was remaining neutral towards him, still having conversations to pass the time. He asked if I liked to see photos that he had taken from his vacation. It was a road trip, and he had tons of scenery pictures. I said sure and took his phone from him. He said, "Just keep swiping left to see all the pics." So I'm scrolling through and swipe one too many times and I'm looking at a full-blown dick pic. Of course, I kind of jump, shudder a bit, and say, "Oh, whoops, I think I went too far," and then pass the phone back to him, thinking it's a total accident, and he clearly sent that to a girlfriend or something. Except he isn't embarrassed at all. He replies with, "I was hoping you would see that," with the creepiest grin I had ever seen. I'm getting chills again typing this. I was all of a sudden very busy and didn't have time to chit-chat that evening. The next morning I placed a call to the company he worked for and explained to them that I thought he might have a crush on me and I was feeling slightly uncomfortable. I told him that I didn't want to cause a scene and was hoping that he would just change his location, or at the very least his schedule. I sometimes have too much compassion and didn't want him to get in trouble, and was worried maybe he thought I would like his dick pic for some reason and that it was my mistake. Like I said, sometimes I overshare and maybe he got the wrong idea. I was thrilled the next night when I went there and another guard was at the store. I was so grateful that his supervisor listened to my concerns. However, when myself and the rest of the closing crew locked up for that evening, we heard a car engine start up just as we left the store. When I looked up for where the sound was coming from, it was in the corner of the mall parking lot, which was completely empty and dark, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Although I couldn't quite make out the exact color of the car, I was convinced it was the same vehicle that Mike drove. I was trying so hard to convince myself that it was just someone else with the same vehicle also closing up for the night. The car drove out of the parking lot, which made me feel better. When I got in my car, I noticed a note under my wiper blade. It read, "I'm so sad that my location changed. We'll try to come back to your store as soon as I can. In the meantime, let's get together," and had his phone number. I'm basically puking in my mouth from nerves at this point. I jump into my car and get the hell out of there. The next day I called Mike's supervisor again. This time I told him the whole story and asked that they relay the message that I'm not interested and to please leave me alone. I also told my store manager, who is a pretty awesome guy, who responded with a, "Aw, hell no," and placed a call to the supervisor as well, asking that Mike be advised not to step back into our stores. I didn't see or hear from Mike for a few weeks after that. I thought I was in the clear. I hadn't told my boyfriend anything at this point. It was a fairly new relationship, and I didn't want him to be weirded out by it. Weeks later, and I'm barely thinking about Mike and his forceful advances, when it's a very rainy evening and I'm at work setting up the new fall collection. When it's raining and dark, it's very hard to see out into the parking lot of the store. Basically, all you can see is the windows and the reflection of yourself in the store. I was over by the windows, bent over, putting some things on the bottom shelf, when a car honked outside the window. Of course, I looked up to see what was happening, and as soon as I did, over my shoulder in the reflection of the store, I could see Mike standing behind me, just standing and staring. I think I jumped a little, probably peed a bit. I tried not to make it look like I even saw him, although I'm sure he knew I did, and I hustled to the other side of the store where the same manager who I told the story to was working. When I told the manager, he ran back to the cosmetic department, but Mike was gone. We later watched the whole thing on camera. That evening, my manager placed an angry call to Mike's supervisor, who then told us that Mike had quit a week before after being told to stay away from our store. You may be wondering why no one called the police at this point, but honestly, it just didn't seem dangerous enough, and no one was getting hurt. It was just kind of creepy. That is, until I finally told my boyfriend about it, and my parents, and I stopped driving myself to work. I had developed a bit of fear of going to my car alone at night. Therefore, either my boyfriend, mom, or dad would drive me and pick me up from work. Except this one night. My parents were out of town and my boyfriend had a thing to go to this particular Sunday evening, so I drove myself. After closing time, I said my see you laters to my coworkers and walked to my car at the end of the parking lot. The parking lot has this river at the end of it, with some benches overlooking a river with 0 lights. The only lights are the ones shining from the middle of the parking lot. I know, super safe spot to park, right? In my defense, the parking lot was always completely full when I got to work. So I'm walking to my car and I see nothing. And then I hear someone speaking. I immediately recognize it as Mike's voice. He said something like, "Why would you do this to me? Why would you make me believe you wanted me? We had so much fun together." As luck would have it, the pharmacist that had closed with me that night wasn't yet in his car as he took the garbage around to the side of the building to the bin. I yelled, "Jim, wait up a second." I hightailed it over to his vehicle, where I said probably a little too loud, "Call 911. The police arrived and scoured the area for Mike, who was gone without a trace. I never saw or heard from Mike again. A few years ago, I moved with my family right before I started college. Unfortunately, it was kind of far from the university I had been accepted into, so I'd been trying to find a place to rent close to my university. My dad helped me and showed me an ad on Craigslist. There was a nice looking house for rent, and it was close to my university. I decided to set up a meeting and go check out the place. I showed up in the afternoon, and unfortunately, I was alone. My dad said I was an adult and a big guy, so I shouldn't worry about meeting this person. This old guy greeted me and then goes, "You'll have to follow me to get to the house for rent." I was confused and said, "Your ad said this was the house for rent. Why do I have to go somewhere else?" He says, "This is my house. I'll take you to the one for rent." I'm a little confused at this point and follow him to his other place. I kind of figured if things didn't look right, I'd just leave. When we get there, I notice the house looks bad, and it looks like people were in it. I didn't see any cars around, so this seemed odd. He looks at me and says, "Don't you want to check it out?" I said, "I don't know. This isn't what was in your ad, and it looks like other people are there." He tells me that there are other people checking it out, and I could join them. something just feels off about this whole thing, and I tell him I wasn't interested anymore. This place looked in bad shape from the outside and appeared to have people in the house. When he asked why I wasn't interested, I told him it was a far drive from my school and work. He got mad and accused me of wasting his time. I said, I'm not the one that advertised the house, and then telling a person it's not the one for rent. He began to glance nervously towards the house and asked if I was sure I didn't want to check it out. I told him no and left. He never contacted me again, thankfully. I'm not sure what his intentions were, but something just felt wrong. Maybe he was just trying to show me the house, but I didn't like that he lied about the house to begin with. And there were people inside the house. I'm not sure what was going on there, but I really didn't want to find out. I also didn't like how he was looking at the house when he was asking me if I was sure I didn't want to go check it out. It seemed so bizarre. He went from being mad to getting kind of desperate for me to go inside. This year certainly has had its ups and downs. I lost weight, improved my relationship, and got into school. But this experience happened just a month ago while dog sitting for a friend. The well-behaved dog we were watching had to be separated from the 3 other dogs we have in our home that belong to my husband. The miniature dachshund is highly territorial and decided it would be a good idea to bolt through the temporary gate we had up to go after our furry visitor. The visitor retaliated and made the little one bleed by its neck and ear with just one bite, then let go. Trying to stop the bleeding ended up in me almost getting my finger taken off and cornstarch all over the place. My husband told me I needed to calm down and asked me to get money out of the bank a few blocks down the road because the little dog's owner was on his way to pick him up and take him to the vet. Rather than taking the car, being fast and endangering people on the road, I ran 8 blocks to the bank, crossing a nice man who paused to let me pass him before he finished taking out his garbage. Less than a block from the bank are 2 side-by-side rental properties that belong to slumlords and frequently rent to shady-looking people that often have cops circling or visiting. I made sure I was on the other side of the street while passing these houses. As I crossed the street on the way to the bank, a lanky mid-30s looking dude with dark hair came out of one of the homes and stared at me while I was finishing crossing the street. As he opened his black truck's door, with his hand still on the door of his truck, he called out, "Hey baby." I said hi, but continued half jogging, half walking, past the rear of his truck and through a thin line of trees separating the bank's ATM and the parking lot from the street. Yes, I immediately realized how stupid responding at all was. But I grew up around a lot of depression and a few suicides, and I know how valuable a friendly greeting can be. Not more than 4 years ago, that was sometimes how I got through the day. I'd go to the store and just randomly get into little interactions with people over dumb little things, so I didn't have to be home while my ex and I were going through a rough patch. Since I dressed plain, most of the people thought I worked there because I had a cart with a few things. Anyways, I got to the bank. My husband called to ask where I was. This is the moment when we also found out that we had faulty locks that lock itself if the door is shut too hard, and my husband had given me the keys with the intent of me taking the car. Having handed me the keys, he couldn't get back inside. My first instinct was to turn around and give him the keys back. It was at this time that I see the man back up his truck to watch me through the balding trees. I promptly turn around and am finishing getting the money for the dog. While at the ATM, the guy keeps watching me as I consistently looked around, watching not only him, but for anything else that moved. At a young age, my mom instilled a very helpful stranger danger and later on self-awareness and defense techniques due to my older brother nearly being kidnapped a few years before. But that's another story for another day. I kept watch on the little mirror on the ATM. He didn't get out. Other than a woman walking her dog on the other end of the parking lot along the busy main street of my small town. I counted the money and put it in my wallet. If it was money he wanted, I would find out, but I really hoped that he realized I was still on the phone with my husband and he would just leave. It was finally time to decide which route to take home. My hands are shaking again as I type this, so excuse my mistakes. I had a small path, 10 or 15 feet in front of him, that led directly in front of the sketchy houses because crossing the exact way I entered meant having to run right into his door or going around his reparked truck. My other option was to take the main road, but it would have taken longer, and I didn't think the lady walking her dog would help. I shoved the wallet into the same hoodie pocket as my keys. My husband has a pocket knife on the keys, and I practiced opening it without looking at it when I first got it. I usually find the click it makes cute, but this time, I still had a lump in my throat. I went back through my training in my head and changed my breathing and how I stood when I walked. I gripped the little knife and headed down the little path between the truck and the houses. My husband asked through the phone if I was alright. My voice was tight, but I hinted something was up, but I needed a few seconds to pass what was bothering me, and that I loved him. He said he loved me too, and wanted to know what was going on. I giggled loudly and reassured him that I was okay, calling him baby at the end, seemingly changing the subject to being surprised that he'd be meeting me and how sweet he was. While doing this, I passed the house closest to the bank. Now I had to pass the house his truck had been in front of. I went quiet, listening to my surroundings more than my husband asking what I was talking about. I listened for any doors opening or footsteps from any direction, but my raspy breath, wide quick footsteps, and my husband on the phone was all I heard. When I was at the end of the first block, I thought I was just being paranoid when I heard this older model truck go into gear and throttle behind me. I thought to myself, he's just going on his way. He will just pass, and I can explain to my husband that I'm just overly cautious. I start telling him in a lower tone that I was aware of a vehicle that watched me get money from the ATM. He starts asking for the license plate, which I normally would pay attention to, but I was busy at the time, and I would have seen the plate, but I was looking at the driver. As I looked before crossing the street and looked over my shoulder, he was staring at me. I waved him on to drive through the crosswalk in front of me. He simply pointed to the same direction I was going, but kept pace with me until the end of the next block. A blue car got behind him, and he went into the next block and made a left. I told my husband about the black truck that had spooked me, but I hadn't actually done anything. Immediately after I finished filling my husband in, I hear the familiar rumble of the truck. Sure enough, it was the same guy, and again keeping pace with me. I crossed another 2 streets with him coasting behind me. I see someone down the street getting into their car on the phone. I see you. Can you check the car to see if my card is in there? My husband catches on this time, asking if he's back. I tell him he's brilliant and amazing. I'm more than halfway home, and this creep is too close for me to go home yet. I cross one more street before looking over my shoulder and exclaiming loudly into the phone, "If this black truck doesn't stop following me, I'm calling the cops." At which point he takes off down the road and a white car is coming up behind him. He makes the next left and I bolt across the street, heading up the hill a few blocks from my house, and finish closing the distance on the back roads. The truck drove down the street again. I saw him through the space between the houses, but he didn't see me or assumed I already got home. I kept my husband on the phone for the rest of the way and arrived home safe without encountering him again. The puppy was given antibiotics for the pain and made a full recovery. I haven't seen that truck around since, but then again, I haven't walked down that street either. Okay, this happened to me last year. Keep in mind, this is told in the perspective of a female. I started school at a local community college. I was looking to make new friends since I never really had the opportunity before. I was a weird fat kid throughout elementary and high school. College was a chance for me to reinvent myself, to actually make friends and fit in for once. It's college. No one gives a fuck if you're weird. You're all just trying to get through finals, after all. Well, I had class with this one kid. Let's call him Creep, because that's what he was. Anyway, me and the Creep had our ITE class together. I'd see him every day, but didn't talk to him much. He stayed in his corner of the room. I sat with my friend, an older lady we'll name Jay. I had a TARDIS backpack. Yeah, I know. It's not bigger on the inside, by the way. Anyway, he saw this and said it was cool. I said that was cool and we talked a bit about our interests as we walked to our next class. He was into cosplay, as was I, and we both enjoyed BBC programs along with anime. He seemed friendly and I went about my day. Things got uncomfortable after that. He started showing up everywhere that I did. Mostly he would invite himself to lunch with me and my friend S. He was disgusting. We went to lunch one day and he ordered this burger with peppers, onions, and mayo. Mayo is the bane of my existence, mind you. He didn't use napkins. The thing smelled terrible and he wiped it on his already stained pants. It wasn't pleasant to say the least. He kept popping up places and inviting himself to lunch, and I was beyond done with him. I have a habit of attracting weird people. I don't know why. I was just ready to cut and run if it came to it. Anyway, he invited himself to lunch with me again when S wasn't present. He said he had a crush on S, and I knew S went through a bad breakup. I told him to leave her alone, but he was insistent on me seeing if she liked him. I said no, leave her alone. He left after that, and I enjoyed my shitty spaghetti. Then the freaky thing happened. I was leaving to go to my car one day when I ran into him. We talked a bit, but I was trying to get away from him, but he really insisted on talking. Eventually, I tried to excuse myself, saying that I was going to go to my car and I would talk to him later. He followed me. He said it was fine and walked with me towards my car. He then proceeded to tell me a funny story about him getting drunk and punching his crazy ex in the face. Like that would totally impress me or some shit. I did what any normal person would. I looked him in the eye and said, no. Got in my car and drove off. He fucked off and left me alone after that. That wasn't the really creepy part though. No. I learned a few weeks ago he killed someone before. Apparently he got into a fight and stabbed someone in self-defense. The circumstances were more than shady though, but the police in my area are pretty shitty. The guy the creep stabbed ended up dying. So yeah, I was stalked by someone who killed another person. Ain't I lucky? When I was 12, I lived on the outskirts of town. On the end of my block was a large cemetery. My friends and I always talked about going there late at night, and one night we actually did. We all met up at Jake's house. There was 3 of us: Jake, Josh, and myself. We had our flashlights and one of those old camcorders. It was a quiet night, and we snuck out of the house and walked towards the cemetery. The cemetery was locked but wasn't guarded. There's a part of the gated off area that the ground was a little higher up on, and we were able to climb the fence and get into the graveyard from there. It was approaching 11:30 and was super quiet. We walked around for a while, and it was pretty uneventful, although it was creepy. We were shining our lights on what looked like an expensive gravestone when out of the corner of Jake's eye, he saw something move. Josh thought he saw something too, but I didn't notice anything. We shined the flashlights in the area, but didn't find anything, so we just kept walking. It was getting boring, so we decided to check out one last area before we left. We were looking at a row of what looked like children's gravestones when we heard a noise coming from our right. Jake, did you hear that? Yeah. Slowly, let's all shine our flashlights in that direction. On a count of 3. 1, 2. We all turned and shined our flashlights in the direction of the noise. And there was a man, a dirty man, staring back at us. He had an evil look on his face. I couldn't tell if he was homeless or what, but he did not look like a nice person. We just stood there staring at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. We slowly backed up, and that's when it happened. He started screaming on the top of his lungs and running towards us. We all turned around at once and ended up tripping over each other. He was now gaining on us. We got back up and started running, but by this point we were all turned around and in the confusion had no idea where the lower part of the fence was. This caused us to split up, which was scary as shit. It's roughly 20 minutes after we ran from him and split up when I hear Jake scream. It sounded like it was coming from the other end of the cemetery. All of a sudden I see Josh bolting it in that direction with something in his hand, so I follow suit. We run over to the screams and the man is dragging Jake by the leg, pulling him as Jake screams on top of his lungs, grabbing at everything. Just when we reached them, Josh swung something and hit the crazy man. I later found out that it was a piece of a tree that broke while Josh was hiding in it. The man fell down and we bolted all together. At that point, Josh knew where we needed to go, so we followed him and got to the fence and jumped over. We ran back to my house, snuck in the window, and locked it. We don't know what the man wanted, or who he even was, but we're never going by the cemetery ever again, even if we have to take the long way to school. So a few years back, sometime in 2015 maybe, it was a regular morning for me and my family, and we were at home. My family is very small, only being me, my sister, and my mom. My mom at the time was cooking me and my sister pancakes for breakfast around 11 a.m. when suddenly we hear the doorbell. I'd like to mention, my sister and I are both disabled, and we're both in wheelchairs due to being born with a disability that doesn't allow us to walk or anything of that sort, so we're really dependent on our mom to protect us. Anyways, the doorbell rang, but we ignore it since we weren't expecting anyone, and we don't answer the door to the solicitors. A few seconds after that, the doorbell rings again, and the three of us still really don't think much of it, but we thought it was a bit weird. So a few minutes pass, and the doorbell is still ringing. We all get a little scared when we suddenly start hearing rustling outside our window. That's why my mom decided to open it. When my mom opened the door, there was an Asian girl in her late teens attempting to pull the frame off the door window. She had a blue Walmart bag filled with God knows what, but it looked very heavy. The girl immediately stops what she's doing, and my mom yells, "What the hell are you doing?" The girl backs up from the window. We noticed a strange black truck parked right outside the house. We could see two other people waiting inside it. We live in a small neighborhood, and this truck is not familiar. So the girl backs away a little and says, is Michelle here?" My mom says, "Who the hell is Michelle?" "There's no Michelle. Get the hell away from my house." My mom was swearing a lot because she was scared. It was just us home with no one to protect us. I was really scared and my sister was crying as we ate her pancakes. The girl immediately ran off as my mom got louder, and she kept on asking for Michelle. There is no one lived in their house named Michelle. The girl ran back to the mysterious black truck and it immediately sped off. My mom started to freak out and she called the police. She gave them her description, but they never came to investigate. That day, my mom made an appointment to get the ADT home security. That night, we all slept in our bed because the room where the Asian girl was trying to take the window off was me and my sister's bedroom. My mom stayed up all night, walking around her house with our axe. No one tried anything again after that. The next day we got a home security with cameras and all that. After talking about this with our neighbors, we learned that these mysterious intruders were returning. These same people actually robbed our neighbors. They weren't home at the time of the robbery, but caught it on the cameras. They stole a few things then left. I thank God that we were safe because we don't know what their intentions were. This happened a few years ago, but it still bugs me to this day. I had just graduated high school, and as a soon-to-be broke college student, I needed some extra cash. I took to selling all my prom dresses on Craigslist. I received a call from someone who took interest in one of my dresses, so of course I answered the phone. "Hello? I'm calling about the blue dress you listed on Craigslist." I was a little surprised at the fact that it was a raspy man's voice saying this, but I didn't think too much of it. I told him the size and the price, nothing crazy. He said that he and his mother were going on a cruise soon, and they needed a fancy cocktail attire for an event on the cruise, which isn't uncommon. So he was calling about this dress for his mother. Then he started asking questions, which at first I wasn't too concerned with, because if I was buying something that pricey, I would too. Here's the list of questions he asked in order, and then my responses. "What size is the dress?" "It's an 8, but fits more like a 6. "How does it fit up top?" Normally? I bought it my size, so I mean it fits me like it's supposed to." "What size bra do you wear?" "I'm sorry, but this isn't relevant." At this point, I couldn't tell if he was genuinely still trying to figure out for his mother, or he just wasn't good at talking, or if he was just a major creep. I soon got my answer though. "Well, I was just wondering for my mom, you know?" "Well, your mom should know what size dress she wears before she shops for one." "Is it a tight dress? Was it tight on you? Can I see a picture of you in it?" I couldn't even form a sentence before he continues on. "And what about panties? Will my mother be able to wear panties? If you even wear anything with it. I would imagine you didn't. Your voice is seductive and slutty. Are you a slut?" At this point, I was so appalled, I didn't even get the words out of my mouth. Everything he said came so fast. I quickly told him that he was disgusting and never to call me again. I deleted and blocked the number, and I deleted my post about the dress and my Craigslist account in general. So this has never happened to me, and I hope it doesn't happen again. I really don't go out much, and I'm always working. I'm either teaching or I'm working on an ambulance. Whenever I do have free time, I'm either at home trying to get some rest or reading a book. My friends and I were talking about how hard it is to meet guys nowadays, and that we should really go out more often. My friend said that she had talked to a couple of guys online, but that she never met them in person, and it was nice to at least have conversation with someone. She tried convincing me to get a Tinder, which I really didn't think was a good idea, because I know that's primarily a hookup app, and I really wasn't looking for that, and wasn't going to waste my time. But after a few days, she finally convinced me and helped me make a profile. Overall, I didn't really like the app and found it odd that people just matched and then just met, but I guess that's just me. One day I was bored, so I went on it and matched with a guy named Cameron. He had about 4 pictures and a decent profile, saying that he wanted to meet some new people and that he enjoyed books and Netflix, which I also enjoy. He messaged me immediately saying that I was very beautiful and all the crap guys tell you. I thanked him and we started talking about the kind of books we liked. Side note, I'm into scary things and find psychological TV and books very interesting and know quite a bit about serial killers. So when he told me that he liked these things, I wasn't alarmed at all. After a few weeks of texting, he asked if I wanted to hang out. I wasn't really ready to meet him, I guess, and I was a bit hesitant and tried to avoid the question about hanging out. I would usually say I was busy at work or something. After 2 months, he finally convinced me to meet. He said we should go hiking, and I told him I was uncomfortable with that and would rather meet in a public place like Starbucks. He agreed and said we could meet at Starbucks. That day came when we met up. He was a bit odd, like controlling over small things, like when I asked for hot coffee and he said that I needed to try a cold coffee he liked, and proceeded to order it without allowing me to answer. After about 2 hours, I just wanted to go home, so I said it's getting late and I should head off. He seemed upset and made an angry face and said it's still early, very loudly. I didn't like that at all, and I said I worked very early. He looked around for a while, like he was trying to control himself from either saying or doing something. I got up and said goodnight and walked out. When I got home, I unmatched him and blocked his number. Fast forward to about 3 days ago. I see on the news about this guy who had murdered a girl at a local hiking mountain. I completely froze when I saw the guy. It was the same guy I got coffee with. I just can't believe how close I came to a murderer. I pass by that Starbucks every morning, and it gives me chills to think he wanted to most likely kill me. This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife Alexa and I were settled down for a night of movies, pizza, and cuddling. We live in a residential area right outside of town. Our home is situated right against the street. Our home is situated across the street from a Presbyterian church with a large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one particular across the street and downwards a bit that owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog ever to exist. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10:15 p.m. and we are laying down watching a film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there's nothing much we can do except maybe confront our neighbor or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be that neighbor that does that? After about 5 minutes, I get off the couch and decide to walk over to our neighbor's home and say something about the dog. As I headed outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately, I noticed the neighbor wasn't home. Their only car was not there. I decided to walk up and ring the doorbell anyways. After a minute with no one answering, I gave up and headed back towards home. I noticed Alexa had stepped outside and was looking towards the direction of the barking. I told her no one was home and that we should just either ignore it or finally file a complaint. No one should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day at work or trying to get some sleep. Alexa and I head back inside for a bit, and finally after 10 minutes the dog ceases to bark. Alexa and I exhale and laughed a bit before continuing our film. But of course, not long after, the dog starts up again. This time, it sounded vicious. I got up, went outside, and approached our neighbor's fenced-off backyard and saw the dog, who must have heard or saw me coming. It stopped barking, walked up to me, and began to pant in the cute way dogs do. I chuckled and said the dog's name, to which it looked at me and sat down. Such a good animal, even if he's so loud. I then heard something that sounded like someone walking through the leaves, coming from behind me and to the right. I turned around to see someone looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well. It sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone. I looked on as the person continued staring in my direction. As the dog continued to bark, I looked towards my house, where I saw Alexa standing next to her car, looking at me with a confused look on her face. I looked in horror as I saw the person reveal himself from behind the gravestone. His forehead and cheek were stained with red blood dripping down from his chin. In his hand was some sort of dagger. The dog began to go ballistic as the person took a few steps in our direction before stopping. I turned to the dog, then back at my home. Alexa, who was still outside, yelled out to me, asking what was wrong. I told her to call the police. She said, "Why? The dog?" To which I replied, "He's fucking armed." Probably confused, Alexa went inside to grab her phone as I continued to watch the person, who now began to back off, the dog now going berserk. It was going to take a bit of time for the police to reach my home, so I readied myself to go in self-defense mode, as I watched the man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery and towards the woods. When the police arrived, the person was long gone, and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They didn't seem to take me seriously, but investigated the area as I explained to Alexa about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexa and I didn't feel much better. We locked our doors and windows and decided to call our neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night in spectacular fashion with The Exorcist. I know this sounds like common sense. Never go alone to a stranger's house. But you always think, it'll be fine. I learned my lesson. I was selling a used VR headset on Facebook Marketplace. A man who lived in my town, 5 minutes from my home, messaged me saying he wanted to buy it. Everything went normal, and we agreed that I'd bring it to him after work at about 5:30. So today, after work, I go over to his address. It's winter, so the sun has set. It's a normal house, normal street. When I knock on the door, a 30-year-old man opens it. I recognize him from his Facebook page. Instead of handing me over the money, he tells me he left his money inside and that I should come in. I politely declined, knowing that setting foot in a stranger's house was a big mistake, especially since I was alone. He continued to ask, but eventually he gave up. He turned and walked into his house to what I assumed was his living room. He emerged a few moments later and stood there in the middle of the hallway, holding out the money. He stood far enough back that I would have to walk into his home to get it. The fact that he so badly wanted me to cross the threshold into his house set off alarm bells in my mind. I held the box I was holding slowly with one hand, stood on the path. We stared at each other for a long 10 seconds before he sighed and walked out of the house over to me. He snatched the box from my hands and dropped the €20 on the floor, accidentally. He stood, waiting for me to bend over and retrieve the money. Instead, I put one hand in my pocket, slipping the key between my fingers just in case I needed to inflict some damage to get away. I think he realized whatever his plan wasn't going to happen, because he sighed again and picked up the money for me. He handed the money to me and just turned away, without another word. I slowly backed out of his garden before jogging to my car, which I parked further down the road. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but this whole situation made me feel so uneasy. I just know I won't be doing that again. I used to go on night walks, but I don't anymore because the summer nights seem to bring out the creeps. I was on my way home one night, and this dude was in his backyard leaning on his wall, having a smoke. I thought nothing of it and started to walk past. Just a note, I always have a box cutter in my shoe for protection, because my pockets are either fake, non-existent, or too small. I'm a girl. So he called out to me, "Hey pretty, come here. Hey beautiful, want to join my pool party?" I don't know if he had a pool, but there was definitely no party. "Hey cutie, let's have some fun." I walked about a block away from him and fixed my shoe just in case I needed to run, and I pulled out my blade too. He didn't follow me this time. I went on several more walks, walking on the opposite side of the road to go home, but he was never in his backyard again until one night when I was walking home on a late night walk. He was there in his backyard, at the wall, calling out to me, telling me to go to him, and typical creep stuff. I had a feeling that I had to pull out my blade immediately, so I did. Then I heard shoes hit the ground, and I looked back. I saw that he had jumped over his wall and was walking towards me. I was on the other side of the road, so I booked it, taking off running through the apartment complex around my neighborhood. I knew my front door was locked, because I used the back door to go on my night walks. I hopped the wall into my backyard. My back door has a sliding screen door, then a sliding glass door. The glass door can be locked and part of the screen. I tried to open the glass door, but apparently when I was gone, my mom locked it. She knows I go out for walks at night. She doesn't want me in the apartment at all. The instant that I found the glass door locked, I slid the screen and angled against the wall just in enough time. A few seconds later, he rounds the corner, and I could kind of see him through the screen if I looked really hard. I see him walk past my hiding spot and back down the street towards his house. I start texting and calling my mom to let me inside. After about an hour or two, when my phone is about to die, she finally unlocks the glass door and opens it because she doesn't see me hiding under the screen. I come out from under and she asks me why I was hiding, and I tell her why, and she calls me a bunch of names before telling me I should have just let him kill me. Frustrated at my mom and scared, I text my friend. I tell him what just happened and all the creepy things that have been happening, and he has the audacity to text me back, "If you dressed differently or took a different route home, this wouldn't happen. This never happens to me because I'm smarter like that." For the record, I always wear all black, a t-shirt, long sleeve, with pants or leggings. Two days ago, I put an ad up on Facebook Marketplace for a brand new bathing suit. I priced it at $10. A woman named Rhonda messaged me expressing interest, and I told her it was hers if she picked it up. I live in an apartment, so I gave the address and met outside, so they didn't know exactly where I lived, for my safety. She seemed fine with that detail, but over the course of 2 days, getting her to stop by was proving difficult. She had given me several different times where she was going to come over, but never did. Never even messaged me to apologize, and I had to keep on asking her if she was still interested. You know, typical marketplace stuff. But then shit starts to get a little sketchy. She starts asking me if I can just leave it on my mailbox for her to take and then drop off the money. I'm not stupid, so I told her I'd rather do it while I'm home. Eventually, I thought I finally got her to get here, and as I'm waiting, I get a message. Mike is picking it up. For those who are not aware, it's a big unwritten rule that if two women are exchanging goods on Marketplace, eBay, or anything, you shouldn't send a man instead to pick it up. That's how a lot of female buyers and sellers end up getting hurt, or worse. Since he was already on his way, I wanted to get this over with. I allowed it, but I woke up my boyfriend so he could come with me for the exchange. When Mike finally shows up, there's someone else in the van, and they sit there, rummaging and looking at us. Mike approaches, and as he's walking up, the van pulls out of my driveway and parks down the street. Mike drops off $10 worth of change in my hand and speed walks back over to the van, and they drive off. Maybe I'm overreacting and reading into this too much, but that was so sketched out. With the behavior that they displayed, I felt like they had no intention of paying for the swimsuit if my boyfriend wasn't there. To start this off, I'm a 19-year-old female, and my friend is 18 and also female. This spring, my friend and I decided to go to the cemetery during the bright day to collect sweets. In our country, there is a custom. After Easter, many people go clean the graves of their deceased relatives, and to honor the memory of them, we put sweets and other products. Other people can come to the cemetery and just pick up what lies on the graves, and thus also honor the memory of these people. That is what me and my friend decided to do. And about a half hour passed without any trouble. All of a sudden we see a quite drunk man, somewhere around his 60s or 70s, which was heading in our direction. He said he couldn't find his bike, and had a bag of candy we assumed he had stolen. Then he for some reason gave us a small bag of sweets, which he collected. We decided to continue the search for sweets and went further into the cemetery. After a while, we noticed the same man was following us at some distance. At first, we thought he was just looking for candy too, like us. But after a while, it was noticeable that he was following us. After a while, he caught up to us and decided to start a conversation. First, he asked us how old we were. My friend and I look younger than we really are, so we decided to say we were 15 years old for some reason, and he believed us. Then he began to ask us about our personal life, paying extra attention to my friend. Said he wasn't going to rape us, asked my friend if she's ever been with a guy at all. Then he decided to take a more decisive action and try to hug us both at once. We almost ran ahead of him trying to avoid this. Up to that point, my friend was answering very politely, but now she was scared, and I was super annoyed and was talking rudely, which is very unlike me. I said I didn't want him to go with us, but the strange man wouldn't listen. Fortunately, he saw someone that he knew and went with them. My best friend and I decided to run away from him, and we got away. We walked around the cemetery again for a while, constantly looking around, but never saw him again. This is something that happened to me a good few years ago, roughly about 7 years ago when I was 12 or 13. I was walking home from school. It was mid-June at this time. I just parted ways with my friend and I had about a 15-minute walk by myself before I got home. I noticed while I was walking with my friend that I kept seeing the same red van along our journey. Now we usually go the longer way so we can walk with all our friends, but this red van just kept popping up. Now I didn't think much of it, I just thought it was different vans, but after a few times I decided to memorize the license plate after my mom told me to do so if I ever felt like I was in danger or if something just doesn't feel right. I parted ways with my friend and started my journey home and decided to take a route that was a little longer than the one I usually take because I didn't feel comfortable walking through the park by myself, and I had just a bad feeling throughout the whole walk home, like something bad was gonna happen. I was only a few streets away from my house when the red van started to crawl behind me. This man looked like he was in his 30s or early 40s, popped his head out and started to try to get my attention and just catcalling me. I remember looking at him and just telling him that I'm not interested and to leave me alone, but that just angered him. He started screaming at me and telling me to get into the van. I will forever remember his teeth, those disgusting yellow rotten teeth. They were like something that an anti-smoking ad would use to scare people to quit smoking. I told him that I would call the police if he doesn't leave me alone. He proceeded to laugh in my face, sped off for a while and parked his van and waited for me to walk past him. I crossed the road and started running down the road, just trying to lose the man. Just when I thought I lost him, there he was, pulling up next to me, sliding his doors on the sides open, and there was another man in there, trying to grab me and pull me in. I'm screaming like there's no tomorrow. The man managed to grab my shoulder and I just bit him until I could taste blood. The man let go of me and I ran for my life. I jumped into a bush and hid. The van making rounds around the neighborhood, and I could see the van driving past every few minutes. It felt like I was in the bush for hours. I checked my watch and it was coming on 6 p.m. now, and I finished school at 3 p.m. I waited until I didn't see the van for at least 30 minutes before I ran home. As soon as I got in, my parents started questioning me, asking me where I was. At first they were mad, as they thought I just decided to stay out with my friends. But that's when I broke down crying and told them everything that happened. My parents rang the police and I gave them my statement. I even gave them the license plate from the car, but nothing came of it, at least as far as I'm aware of, anyway. I refused to walk home until I turned 16, and I got lifts with either my friends or my parents made arrangements for me to get picked up. This happened to me when I was in the 3rd grade, about 8 years old. My regular babysitter was ill, so my mom asked one of our neighbors, Brandy, who had kids and babysat a lot of the neighbors' kids, if she could watch me and my brother for a few hours. We were having so much fun at Brandy's house when my mom came to pick us up. I asked if we could stay a little longer and finish Madagascar, which we had just started. She said that was fine, but I was to go straight home after. Like maybe half a block, so not far at all. So the movie finishes. Brandy said I need to get home fast because it was dark out. As I'm walking home, this other neighbor, Dennis, is standing outside in his yard. I had seen Dennis around the neighborhood because his wife is very unforgettable looking. They had a daughter that was maybe about 4 at the time, so I didn't ever play with her or know her family outside of seeing them around the neighborhood. Dennis starts calling me saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" "Going home to my parents." "Do you want to come inside for a little?" "No, my mom told me to come straight home." "I'm sure she won't be mad." "No thanks." "I have a daughter who would love to play with you. We can make snacks." At this point, I was like, red flag abort mission, and started booking it home. Then he starts following me. Not quickly, just walking slowly like Michael Myers. Luckily, I made it home, and once he saw that I was approaching my house with my porch light on, he backed off. I'd also like to mention that behind our houses is a giant wooded area with paths that led to a nearby lake, So dude could have caught up with me and dragged me into the woods or something. I try not to think like that, but what other motives could he have had, you know? Fast forward until I'm in high school working at a restaurant in town, and I see Dennis and his wife all the time. Turns out they were secret shoppers at our restaurant. I don't think he recognized me, thankfully. When I was 17 or 18, I was driving home from a friend's house after a movie marathon. It was around 1 a.m. when I left, and I had a decent drive. Not quite halfway, my gas light comes on. I've had a few creepy catcall experiences at gas stations, and was a little paranoid stopping that late in the middle of nowhere, as I was a 110-pound teenage girl. In the end, I think if I wasn't so cautious, I would have been kidnapped or killed. The first gas station I come across was well lit, and in a pretty open space. I drove up to a pump and looked around my car mirrors before getting out. As I started pumping gas, this normal looking guy comes out of the gas station shop and starts smoking a cigarette. The pump kept clicking off and not working, so I started messing with it and trying to get it to pump. The guy starts watching me, laughing. I assumed he was just laughing to himself, watching a teenage girl trying to pump gas. After maybe a fourth a gallon, I gave up and moved to a new pump. After this point, if I didn't do absolutely everything I did, I would have been screwed. When I got back into my car, I locked my doors and drove to the other pump. I checked all my mirrors before getting out and shutting off my car again. It was an old 90s Beetle that didn't always start right away. That's when I saw the guy walking up to my car. He was smiling, walking up to the driver's side window. Not wanting him next to me, I rolled down the passenger window. He paused for a moment, then smiled to himself and walked to the passenger window. He stuck his head all the way inside my window to talk to me. "Hey, I know this seems really weird, but I promise you I'm not a creep or anything. My car broke down." Then he points to a red SUV. "And I need a ride home. It's just a half mile up the road." "I'm sorry, but I don't know you." "Oh no, I totally get it. I thought it was pretty weird as I was walking up here. But it's only a half mile up the road, and I'm totally stranded. I wish I could help you, but I really don't know you." "Yeah, I got you. If you had a truck or something, I would have offered to ride in the back." "Sorry, no." All of a sudden he looks pissed. He yanks at my door, but I had locked it before. Then he reaches for the inside of my handle through the window. My car is still running, and I slammed into first and peeled out as he opened the door. The car taking off slammed it shut, and I sped off. I called the police after I got away. They looked at the gas station cameras. Right after I left, he got into his red SUV and drove off. If I hadn't unlocked my doors a second time, I would have been screwed. If I let him come into the driver's side window, he could have grabbed me. If I had shut off my car, I wouldn't